This example, we are going to explain about Redux Toolkit, one of the API of Redux Toolkit, createAsyncThunk. So this, which is basically used for performing asynchronous action in Toolkit. So we can explain createAsyncThunk in Redux Toolkit with an example. For that one, what I am going to do, firstly I am going to install the libraries in the React Native project. So we can just go into the getting start. Then we can just install the libraries which we need to set up a Redux Toolkit store. So we can jump into our project. Here is the project which I have created. Just run this command. Also we can just add Redux. Okay, then what we can do, we can just set up a store inside our application. So for that one, what we can do, just go to the configure store. Yes, so this is the example. We can just go for a deep example with middleware. Now what we can do, go to the project, open the project. I'm going to import my project. Here is the project. Yes, now inside app.js we have a different code created by React Native. We can just remove and we can just create a class component here, app. Okay, now what we can do, sorry, view import view from React Native, right? So you can just have a view here and just close this one. We can have small styling here, flex equal to 1, background color red. Fine. Now we can just refresh the screen. Here you can see background color is red. You can just change into white itself. Yes, the screen is coming here. Now inside here, what I am going to do, I am going to create one folder src. Inside src I am going to create one more folder, home screen.js. Fine. So here I am going to create a functional component, import React from React. Now what we can do, we can just create the functional component here, home screen. Okay, here what I am going to do, I am going to export this one, export default home screen. Here what I am going to do, I am going to return my view style, flex equal to 1, background color green. Then we can just close this one. Okay, now I am going to import my home screen into app.js file. So you can just import home screen from src home screen. Now the next thing is we need to set up a store. We can just create one more file here, store, right? Store.js. Now what we can do, we can just add the whatever the things we need. We can just add Redux Toolkit config store. Fine. Then we can have a logger to add the action. So we can just install logger yarn add Redux logger. Fine. So this is enough for creating a store, right? We can just const store. Here I am going to create my store, right? So we easily created a store. Now what I am going to do, I am just add an empty object, and then in the middleware I am going to add the logger. So we can just import our logger, Redux logger. Fine. Now here I am going to import my logger. Also I am going to add this logger into our middleware. How can we add a logger? Here, middleware get middleware concat logger, right? So you can just add this command. Now we can just export this one, export default store. Yes, so using Redux Toolkit we just created a simple store in minimum step, right? Now what we can do, we can just import this store, import store from src folder store, right? Now what we need, we can import provider. So we can just import provider from Redux. Okay, now what we can do, we can just wrap this inside our view inside, or we can just wrap our home screen into provider. We can just wrap our home screen into provider. We can just supply our store. Okay, so it should be imported from not Redux, React Redux. We can just install React Redux as well and add React Redux. Fine. Now what we can do, we can just change into React Redux. So import provider is added. Now let's see what's happened. We can just refresh the screen. So there is some error is coming. We can just reload the application once more. Error is located at view. We can just import function default app is created, home screen is there, view is there. Yes, now we can just reload the function. Yes, there is some error is coming. We can just check out what is the error. So we can just go here, create slice. We can just search for Redux Toolkit example. This starter. So configure store is there, React Redux is there. We have added. Yes, it is not. The spelling was the wrong. It is provider. We can just refresh the screen. Now let's see what's happening. Yes, cannot see get set because we didn't define a perfect reducer, right? So that's why it's getting error. Now we can just create a reducer. We can just add a file API reducer. Okay, API reducer.js. Inside this API reducer, we can have a slice. So we can just copy this one, right? And here I am going to paste it, and I am also need a initial state. We can just have an initial state here. Fine. Now what we need to create the slice, right? So we can just create const API reducer. So or API slicer, we can just say API slicer. So it should be created from create slice, right? So we can just copy this one, paste it here. Fine. Now what we need to add the name and initial state, right? We can just have a name and initial state. And also we can have a reducer. So reducers, here I am just adding API reducer, or we can just keep it for right now. Then we need to export this one, so we can just export this reducer for now. We don't want to export action for now. We can just export the reducer, and we can just import the reducer into our store. Import API reducer from reducer. Here we can just add API reducer is equal to API reducer. We can just small letter. Now if I refresh, it should work everything perfectly, right? So you can just refresh, or we can just close the project and run the project once more. So it's getting an error, get state is not defined. We have already added the action API reducer. Yes, API reducer is there. Inside this one we can just have a return. Yes, we can just have an increment function here if needed. I don't think so. We need API reducer, API slicer dot reducer. We have API slicer dot reducer. No, counter reducer is already imported. Yes, reducer. So we can have this. So error is coming from app.jsl. We can just check what is the error is coming. So store is added. console.log store. We can just check what is the store is coming and just debug this one. Yes. Debug. Now it's coming undefined. AP slice reducer is coming undefined. It is coming from here. You can just remove this bracket. Now let's see what is coming. Yes, now only one error in home screen. We can just import our view from React Native. Now if I refresh, everything should work. My store should work as set per. Yes, I can see my store is coming here. So issue was we just added a bracket inside app.js file. Fine. Now we have a store.getState. We can just call this store.getState, and if I refresh, there should be API reducer here. The values are coming. Now what we need, we are going to hit the API using Redux. So what we commonly do in the last example, we successfully completed our store, right? Now what the next thing is, we are going to hit an API in the Redux Toolkit. For that one, what I am going to do, I am going to import one more thing, createAsyncThunk. Okay, so inside this one, what I am going to do, I am going to change my initial case. So I am going to hit API. For there will be a loading flag, then there will be a data for array for storing my data, then there will be one more variable for storing if there is any error come, right? So we can just declare an error variable. So this all value have initialized on initial state. Now the next thing is, we need an API hitting process, right? So we can just create an API hitting process, const export const fetch user. Here I am going to fetch the user API and I am just calling createAsyncThunk. Okay, now what I need to give a variable. I can just give user fetch. So I can easily understand this is an action for fetching user, right? So any name, anything you can just give here. If you want to give user API calling, anything you can give. I'm just, for my understanding, I'm just giving user slash fetch. Now there will be a callback. So inside this callback, I'm going to return my API logic. So I'm going to return an API logic here, fetch. So which API I'm going to use? I'm just going to use JSON placeholder API, where I am just getting users details. So I'm just copying this API here, fetch. So it's a get API, so I don't want to any method. Then what I need to have, then here I am going to JSONize the response. I'm just dot JSON. Then another thing what I need to do here, I am just printing my console here, res dot console dot log res. Fine. So what I have done, I just write the API logic. I didn't do anything extra, right? What I have done, I just hit the API and JSONize this API response here, and I am printing API. Now what I am going to do, I am going to import this method in my home screen. Import from API reducer. Now this is not a API, right? This is not a direct API calling, right? If there is a direct API calling, we don't want createAsyncThunk, right? So this is an action dispatching. For action dispatching, what we need dispatch method, right? For that one, what we can do, we can use the dispatch hook, right? If you are not aware of dispatch hook, just search dispatch hook React. So you will get the dispatch hook API reference. So we can just go for use dispatch hook. Okay, so we can just search for use dispatch hook. Yes, selector is there. Yes, this one. So this is a hook from React Redux. We can just copy this one, use dispatch. Now I am going to create my dispatch from the hook, right? So we can just have a dispatch hook. Now what I am going to do, I am going to dispatch this action on my use effect. So use effect will call when the API or when the screen is mounting, right? So we can just call this API on screen mounting. So now what I am going to do here in dispatch fetch user. So why I am dispatching rather than calling an API? Here you can see this is not a simple API calling. This is an asynchronous action creation, right? So create asyncthunk. This is a action creation. So I have to dispatch an action, right? So that's why I'm calling dispatch fetch user. Now let's see what's happening. We can just uh, refresh our screen. Here you can see the response is coming. The response is printing on API reducer where we have added our reducer, right? Now the thing you can see also dispatch action is dispatching. So there are two actions are we can see. One is user fetch pending and user fetch fulfilled. Then there will be one more case if this API is failed, right? If thing is we need to store this response into our reducer. Now if currently if you check, you can see anything is not storing in the reducer, right? All the data whatever we are printing just printing here, right? Now the next thing is we need to store this data into our reducer. So for that one, what I am going to do, I am going to return this response from here. Just return my response. And here what I am going to do, I am going to add one more parameter, extra reducer. So extra reducer will be always a callback. Here inside there will be a callback builder. Okay, now this will be a callback. Fine. So it will return a builder method. So builder will have, if I just check here, you can see builder dot. I can add different cases. Here you can see one method calling addCase. Now every API there will be three cases, right? One is it will be a rejected case. So it's a promise, right? So it will be a rejected, or it will be a pending. Pending means this is starting, or fulfilled. So there are three cases for every fulfilled. So there will be three cases for every asynchronous action. One is rejected, or it will be a pending, or it will be fulfilled. That means API response is completed. Now what we are going to do, we are going to handle each cases here, right? So what I am going to do, I am going to handle first case pending. For that one, what I have to do, copy this one. I am going to add one case, fetch user. Just click. Here you can see different suggestion. You can see pending. So I'm just selecting pending. So inside this one, what I'm going to do, I will get a state callback. Okay, so this will be an arrow function. I'm just only changing this method. Okay, so I'm just changing loading only. I'm just setting into loading true here. So we have added our first case, pending case. That means API is calling started, right? So if I can just go into my emulator and I just refreshing this one. Okay, here you can see API pending is calling. So inside this one, here loading is true. See, loading is true. So that means this cases is working. So what I have done, I have just add one more parameter, extra reducer, into my create slice, and then I just created case for pending. Okay, now what I am going to do, I am going to create one more case pending. Here you can see one more cases is coming. What I am going to do here, fulfilled. So inside fulfilled there will be action payload as well, right? So we can just add action, we can just print action. Okay, now what I am going to do, I'm just printing my action, whatever the action is coming. So here we will get two callback, one is state and the action. So what I am going to do, I am just I'm just printing this action, but the action is coming. Also I'm just making loading is true because this API is already fulfilled, right? We don't want to show the loader once again. Now what we can do, we can just go into our statement. So we can just go into our emulator and just reload this one. Let's see what's happening. Pending is coming, fulfilled is coming, right? So inside fulfilled you can see false is coming. Also here you can see the payload is printed here, right? Here you can see API fulfill and the payload is coming as the data. So this console is coming from here. You can just have a arrow so that we can easily understand. Now what I am going to do, I'm just reload the function. Here it is pending. Now see, the API response is printing on my action. Okay, here you can see action is coming. The action type is here, action payload here, and the metadata, whatever the metadata, whether it is rejected or request status, I can get it here, right? Now what I need to store this data into my state. So we can just have state dot action dot, so data is coming on payload, right? Here you can see the data is coming on payload. Just I am copying this one, is equal to action dot payload. Okay, now let's see what's happening. We can just print this one. Also the failure case also we can just add failure. It will be rejected case. In that case, what we need to loading also will be there. Through just we can remove this data, and also we can just add error as state dot error as something went wrong. So API went wrong, right? So we can have something went wrong. Also we can just have action dot payload. If the error is coming on action payload, we can just set the value here, right? So currently I'm just setting a string. Now what we can do, we can just reload the function once more. Here you can see, firstly API pending, what will happen, this will make true, and then after fulfill, this make load true. Also the data whatever we are receiving is stored into the array. Now what we need to use all this reducer, all the value into our reducer, right? For that one, what we can do, we can just use selector. So import use selector from React Redux. Also you can just import it from Redux Toolkit. We can just use this use selector. Now what I am going to do, I am just going to print const data. So the data is coming from use selector state dot, here is the data is coming from API reducer, right? So we can just copy API reducer. So we can just print const console.log data. What the data is coming, we can just print. I can just reload. Use selector is not a function. We can just go into here. You can just change into React Redux. Now let's see what's happened. Here you can see all the data is coming here on true loading. After a moment we are receiving the data, right? Now what we can do, we can have different, if data loading is true, we can just return activity indicator, or we can just have a text. We can just use activity indicator in React Native. So we can just use the activity indicator from React Native API. Fine. And also we can just import it from React. Now if the data is received, what we can do, we can just map the data. So data dot map item. So here we can, what we can do, we can just print the data using item. So what are the data is coming? So it include if we just check out the response name, right? So we can just print the name here, item dot name. Let's see what's happening. Now we can just refresh our screen. So data dot map is not defined. We can just data dot data. Okay, now let's see what's happened. Text is not defined. We can just import text. Now let's see what's happened. Yes, the name is printing here. You can see after a moment loading is short, the name is printing. Yes. Now if we can just check out the doc, here you can see the data is coming on API reducer. So inside there will be an ID. So we can just have ID here. We can just pass the key as item dot ID. Now if I just refresh, the warning also will remove. If I just go here, you can see the data is printing, the loader is showing, right? So what we have done, so we have created our async action using createAsyncThunk method, and we have added all the case using extra reducer, which will give a builder callback. So inside this builder you can have different cases. So every promise will have pending, fulfilled, and then rejected. So we have handled that case in the reducer. So we will receive the data on home screen. So this is how we will use createAsyncThunk method in Redux Toolkit. Now we can jump into the next lecture.